Picture a window, not a screen, not a display. A window, the kind you look through, clear, flat, optically perfect. Now picture that window stopping a .50 caliber armor-piercing bullet, not shattering, not cracking, stopping it. In 1.6 inches of material that weighs half as much as the bulletproof glass it replaces. Picture that same window seeing in the dark, transparent not just to visible light, but to infrared wavelengths the human eye can't detect. A window that doesn't just protect what's behind it, but actively helps what's looking through it. Picture a window that is several times more scratch resistant than conventional glass, nearly as hard as sapphire. The US military has been using this material in helicopters, armored vehicles, and missile sensor domes for decades. It is called transparent aluminum. And in 1986, 6 years after the first patent was issued, while Raytheon was already developing it for military applications, a science fiction film introduced it to the public as an impossible future technology. The audience laughed. They thought it was absurd. It was already in missile sensor domes. Most people never knew. They were never supposed to. Why? Bulletproof glass, the kind used in armored vehicles, military helicopters, and high-security installations, is not actually glass in any conventional sense. It is a laminate. Multiple layers of glass and polycarbonate are bonded together, each layer absorbing and distributing the energy of an impact before it reaches the next. The result is a material that stops bullets, but at a cost. Bulletproof glass is heavy, extremely heavy. A panel thick enough to stop rifle fire can weigh hundreds of pounds. In a military vehicle, that weight adds up fast, degrading fuel efficiency, reducing payload and slowing response. In a helicopter, every pound of window is a pound of fuel, equipment, or personnel that cannot be carried. In a fighter jet canopy, weight directly affects performance, maneuverability, and range. Bulletproof glass is also thick. To achieve protection equivalent to what Alon provides at 1.6 inches, traditional laminated glass requires more than 3 inches of material. In applications where space is constrained, the nose dome of a missile, the sensor window of a targeting system, or the viewport of a submarine, that difference is not marginal. It is the difference between the design working and not working. And bulletproof glass scratches. In the field, in harsh environments under constant use, conventional laminated glass degrades. Its optical clarity diminishes. Sensors that see through it become less accurate. Pilots whose canopies scratch and haze have compromised visibility. Engineers needed something harder, lighter, optically cleaner. Something that could protect without the bulk. What they found was a ceramic. Transparent aluminum is not actually metallic aluminum, it is Alon, aluminum oxynitride, a ceramic engineered from aluminum, oxygen and nitrogen, sintered at extreme temperatures into a structure so precise that light passes through it like glass, but it keeps the hardness of armour. Alon measures 8.5 on the Mohs hardness scale. Diamond is 10, sapphire is 9. Steel sits at roughly 4 to 4.5. Alon is harder than steel by a factor of 2. It is nearly as hard as sapphire, the material used in high-end watch crystals and smartphone camera lenses because of its scratch resistance. But unlike sapphire, Alon can be manufactured in large, flat panels, domes, rods, and complex curved shapes. A single panel of Alon 1.6 inches thick stops a .50 caliber armor-piercing round. The same protection in traditional laminated glass requires more than 3 inches of material, and it weighs roughly twice as much. It also sees in the dark. Alon is transparent not just in the visible spectrum, but into the near ultraviolet and mid-infrared, wavelengths invisible to the human eye but critical to military sensors. A targeting system that looks through conventional glass has its infrared sensitivity degraded by the glass. A targeting system that looks through Alon gets the full infrared picture. The window becomes effectively invisible to the sensor, for a missile seeker head, for a targeting pod on a fighter jet, for a forward-looking infrared system on a helicopter. That distinction, a window that does not interfere with what is looking through it, is operationally significant. The US military does not develop materials for the public, it develops them for itself. By the time the public hears about a material, the military has usually been using it for a decade. Research into aluminum oxynitride began in the early 1970s simultaneously in Japan, the United States, and France as materials scientists explored what happened when nitrogen was added to aluminum oxide. In 1974, the US Army Materials and Mechanics Research Center in Watertown, Massachusetts launched a dedicated program. The goal was specifically military, a harder, lighter, optically cleaner, transparent armor material. By 1980, the first patent on aluminum oxynitride in crystalline form was issued to J.W. Macaulay. Additional patents followed in 1984 and 1988. The technology was commercialized by Raytheon, one of the largest defense contractors on Earth, not by a consumer materials company and not by a glass manufacturer, but by the company that builds missiles, radar systems, and electronic warfare equipment for the US military. Raytheon used Alon in military applications for years before transferring the technology and the Alon trademark to Surmet Corporation in 2002. Surmet has been the primary manufacturer ever since, supplying Alon sensor windows, armor panels, and optical components almost exclusively to defense and aerospace customers. The US Air Force Research Laboratory and the Defense-wide Manufacturing Science and Technology Program worked together from 2006 to 2019 specifically to solve one of Alon's key limitations, panel size. Prior to 2019, the largest Alon panel available was just 3 square feet smaller than the side window of most cars. The Air Force funded over a decade of manufacturing development to push that limit. By 2019, Surmet could routinely produce panels up to 8 square feet. The Department of Defense uses Alon on both Black Hawk and Chinook helicopters. It is in the sensor domes of missiles, the transparent nose cones that protect the infrared seeker heads of heat-seeking weapons while allowing them to see their targets. It is in the lenses of battlefield cameras. It is in armoured vehicle windows. NASA has evaluated it for windows and cupolas on the International Space Station. For 40 years, transparent aluminum has been a military material, developed and funded by the military, deployed in systems most people will never see, doing jobs most people will never know about. The civilian world got Star Trek. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home was released in 1986. In the film, the engineer Montgomery Scott, Scotty, travels back in time to 20th century San Francisco and walks into a plastics factory. He needs to build a water tank large enough to hold 2 humpback whales. He needs a material that does not exist yet. He sits down at an early Macintosh computer, attempts to speak to it, and then, realizing the error, picks up the mouse and speaks into it instead. The factory owner watches him type a formula. Scotty offers the formula as payment for the plexiglass he needs. The factory owner asks what it is. Scotty says, "Transparent aluminum." The film was written as science fiction, but the US Army had been funding Alon research since 1974. The first patent was issued in 1980. Raytheon was already developing it for military applications by the time the film was released. Nobody in the film's audience knew that. The writers almost certainly did not know it either. But the material Scotty described, transparent and strong, capable of holding enormous pressure, was already being made in limited quantities in classified military research programs, when the film portrayed it as an impossible future technology. The gap between public knowledge and military reality was already a decade wide before the movie came out. It has only grown since. Nobody corrected the record. Nobody needed to. The answer is one word: cost. Alone costs between $10 and $15 per square inch. A single square foot panel, roughly the size of a piece of paper, costs between $1,440 and $2,160. The aquarium comparison makes the scale visceral. A standard 180-gallon glass fish tank costs approximately $2,000. The same tank built from Alon would cost between $63,000 and $95,000. Just for the walls, that cost comes from the manufacturing process. Alon begins as a carefully controlled powder of high-purity aluminum oxide and aluminum nitride. That powder is pressed into a near finished shape and then sintered, meaning fired in a kiln at extreme temperatures for days under precisely controlled conditions. The sintering process has to be managed too within near absolute accuracy. If the temperature profile deviates, if the atmosphere inside the kiln is wrong, or if the time is off, the material does not achieve optical clarity. It becomes translucent rather than transparent. Useless for most applications. After sintering, the Alon undergoes extensive grinding and polishing using diamond abrasives, the only material hard enough to work it. Any surface defect scatters light and degrades the optical performance. The polishing process is slow, precise, and expensive. For military sensor applications, the tolerances are essentially those of a precision optical instrument. The result is a material that requires massive custom furnaces, highly controlled environments, days of processing time, and diamond tooling for every single panel produced. There are no shortcuts. The thermodynamics of the sintering process are not amenable to easy improvement. Alon is expensive to make, and the path to making it cheaper is not obvious. At $10 to $15 per square inch, a car windshield made from Alon would cost roughly $20,000 to $30,000. A standard residential window would run $15,000 to $25,000. The economics for civilian adoption simply do not work. Yet carries a lot of weight in that sentence. Alon's trajectory is not static. It is following a pattern that materials scientists recognize, the path of advanced materials like carbon fiber, Kevlar, and GPS, which started in defense and eventually crossed into the civilian world as manufacturing costs came down. Alon is currently where carbon fiber was in the late 1970s. The manufacturing process is being refined, panel sizes are growing, volume is increasing as the defense market expands. Surmay is the only large-scale manufacturer in the United States. That monopoly on manufacturing, combined with the almost entirely military customer base, means there is no competitive pressure driving costs down the way a consumer market would. The incentive structure is different. A defense contractor buying Alon sensor windows for missiles is not price sensitive in the way a consumer buying a smartphone screen is. Military procurement tolerates high unit costs in ways that civilian markets do not. For Alon to break into civilian applications, automotive windshields, architectural glass, and consumer electronics, it needs either a dramatic manufacturing cost reduction, a manufacturing competitor, or an application where the performance premium justifies the price. All three are possible. None is imminent. Consumer electronics is the obvious long-term target, but the gap between current costs and consumer viable costs remains enormous. Space. On the International Space Station, windows are one of the most vulnerable components. They face micrometeorite impacts, thermal cycling between extreme heat and extreme cold, radiation exposure, and the constant abrasion of orbital debris. A conventional glass window that develops a scratch or a small impact crater degrades the optical systems that look through it. On the International Space Station, those optical systems include Earth observation equipment worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Alon's scratch resistance, impact resistance, and optical stability across temperature extremes make it nearly ideal for space applications. NASA's evaluation of Alon for International Space Station cupola windows, the observation modules from which astronauts photograph Earth, is not a theoretical exercise. It is a practical assessment of whether the material's performance premium justifies the cost in an environment where replacement is essentially impossible. On a space station, you cannot order a new window. If the window fails or scratches or cracks, you live with it, or you launch a replacement at a cost that makes Alon's price look trivial. The calculus is completely different from a civilian building. The same logic applies to deep space missions. A crude Mars mission window that can survive the journey without degrading, without scratching, without hazing, without losing its optical clarity under radiation exposure is worth any manufacturing cost, because the alternative is launching replacement windows to Mars. Alon is not just a military material waiting for civilian cost curves to catch up. It is the right material for the most extreme environments humans are beginning to enter. And as those environments become more common, as space tourism grows, as orbital infrastructure expands, as deep space missions become serious, Alon's market will expand with them, driving the manufacturing volume that eventually brings costs down. Here is the number that reframes everything. The global bulletproof glass market is currently valued at somewhere between $5 and $10 billion annually, depending on how the category is defined. Alon, despite its superior performance in almost every measurable dimension, hardness, weight, optical clarity, infrared transparency, scratch resistance, holds a small fraction of that market. Not because it does not work better, because it costs more. That gap between performance and adoption, driven entirely by manufacturing cost, is the defining feature of Alon's story. It is not a conspiracy. Nobody sat in a room and decided to hide it. The military classified what it needed to classify, procured what it needed to procure, and the civilian world simply was not the customer. A material that costs $10 to $15 per square inch does not find its way into consumer products, not because anyone stopped it, but because the economics never made sense until now. Yet, the military use is not incidental. It is the reason the technology has survived and advanced at all. Without decades of defense procurement, without Raytheon, without the Air Force Research Laboratory, without Surmey, Alon would be a laboratory curiosity, a patent from 1980 sitting in an archive. The military application is what kept the manufacturing investment alive long enough for the technology to mature. Alon is somewhere on that curve right now, closer to the beginning than the end. But moving. In 1986, the audience laughed at Scotty. The military was not laughing. They had been using it for over a decade. That gap between what defense knows and what the public knows is not measured in years. It is measured in decades. And transparent aluminum is one of the clearest examples of how wide it can be. That moment is coming. Panel sizes are growing, costs are falling, the applications are expanding. When it arrives, when Alon appears in a car windshield or a smartphone screen or a skyscraper window, most people will think it is new. It will not be. It will just be the first time the price was right. The material existed in 1980. The military used it for decades. You thought it was science fiction. It was already keeping soldiers alive.